There's an old piece of writer's advice which asks you to consider, is this the most interesting moment in the lives of your characters? And if not, why aren't you showing us that? In the case of Before Watchmen, the reason is of course that Watchmen had already been published as a comic book, a motion comic, and a live-action film, and there had not yet been a large enough interval of time to publish the incoming animated movie or HBO TV series. The only barrier then to retelling Watchmen yet again was time. From these facts, it is difficult to conclude that Before Watchmen was conceived of for any reason other than the economic incentives it offered, a stench which follows all subsequent works and IP owner producers without the input of the original writer. Lacking any original intention to serialize from Alan Moore, Before Watchmen is a story without a mandate, and after reading all 37 issues, I feel comfortable in mostly dismissing it as the exploitative garbage it always appeared to be. Let's break this down by writers. Darwyn Cooke emerges as the true hero of Before Watchmen, with his Minutemen and Silk Spectre books easily among the event's only good tie-ins. Cooke's noted refusal to write the entire event and reluctance to even work on Silk Spectre marks him as a writer unwilling to simply engineer a story under editorial mandate, which is cool, but the mere fact of this editorial dispute also suggests to us how much Cooke may actually have thought about the idea of this event overall, which probably wasn't much. Despite the criticisms I made of his Minutemen book, since examining the rest of the event more closely, I have come to appreciate Cooke's efforts to meaningfully distinguish his work from Watchmen's style, and to justify this approach within the book itself, unlike so many of his peers. The added advantage of being first off the block meant that these books do not contain laborious references to other tie-ins, and thus preserve their independence, which really matters when so much of the surrounding material is painful reading. J. Michael Straczynski submitted a far patchier effort, with my favourite tie-in of all in Dr. Manhattan, and one of the dullest comic books I've ever read in Moloch. His insistence upon meddling with the canon, often without establishing the proper internal logic, was occasionally effective, but mostly infuriating, and offensive on an almost instinctual level when it appeared to muddle the story with ideas from the Zack Snyder film. Brian Azzarello's contributions were the two most uninspired tie-ins of the series. While I'm still confused by the emptiness of Comedian, both books were tremendously violent and, particularly in the case of Rorschach, glorified the characters in a way they were never intended to be. Alan Moore even said on record that Rorschach was not written to inspire the creation of similarly violent and aggressive characters, but rather as someone a better world would not require. The existence of a Rorschach tie-in comic that revels in the character's violence and anger is the obvious conclusion of the comic book industry's failure to understand Moore's ideas. Also, everyone did it, but Comedian was particularly guilty of inserting the Watchmen smiley badge everywhere it could fit. Some uses were better than others, but it didn't make sense that the world should be so aware of the fact that it existed within a Watchmen comic book. Azzarello's uses of the icon were rarely what could be called clever. And then we come at last to Len Wein, whom I recently learned was an editor on the original Watchmen before quitting amid creative differences. Given his Before Watchmen contributions, that may have been for the best. Wein left the original Watchmen editorial team when he felt that Moore's planned ending for the story was too close to an episode from, guess what, The Outer Limits. And despite Moore acknowledging this closeness by inserting the episode into the book's final scene, Wein obviously never got over this perceived slight, and so after 25 years of waiting, he finally got to turn Watchmen's singular genius into a serial TV binge watcher. Hurrah? Otherwise, Wein's efforts can be best described as bad. But however you look at it, whether it was an economic pursuit for DC, a project your publisher pressured you into for Darwyn Cooke, a chance to flaunt your cleverness for J. Michael Straczynski, a mere excuse to draw some fight scenes for Lee Bermejo, or simply stone-cold vengeance for Len Wein, this collaboration involved very few good intentions. Being so far in the weeds for so much of these reviews, I think I've almost forgotten to mention how ridiculous the idea of a Watchmen prequel actually is when you consider the truly anti-consumerist sentiments of the original story, which, fun fact, was forced to include extra back matter when DC could not find advertisers to purchase the space. The whole idea of a book like that having a prequel is the stuff of satire.
Mr. Moore, will you sign my DVD of Watchmen Babies? Which of the babies is your favorite?
This sort of attempt at sale by brand recognition deserved to be placed alongside the very worst offenders in this category of artistic criminality, namely Harper Lee's Ghost Set of Watchmen and the Dante's Inferno video game. Let's be very clear about this. Before Watchmen is an act of cultural vandalism. Not only is it a black mark against the precursor story, but also the art form of comics itself. As crazy as Alan Moore surely is, and I mean he's proper crazy, events like this really do demonstrate that he is right to detest the corporate instincts of his former employer. One could almost be forgiven for thinking that DC's cancellation of the epilogue chapter of Before Watchmen amounts to some kind of mea culpa, some acceptance of their lack of judgment. But no, of course not, DC never learns anything. Just ask the canonical version of Carrie Kelly, who appeared in the New 52 briefly before disappearing as inexplicably as she had arrived, or the god-awful DK3, published so intermittently that it seems to have lost the attention of even its own writers. And of course, DC is now intent on bringing the Watchmen into the main canon, a move which is ironically what Alan Moore had in mind to begin with, before being told to use original characters so as to prevent harming the mainstream continuity. And that really is the legacy of Before Watchmen, an event as blind to its own history and probable future as it was ill-conceived and poorly executed. But, in the interest of ending this tirade with some optimism, at least we can now all look forward to the inevitable future team-up between Damian Wayne and Kid Night Owl. God fucking damn it.